Hey, what's up, fam? Welcome to our whiteboard session with Hawa. Today we're going to be talking about some Java developer stuff. I'm going to let her kick off in terms of like what exactly she's going to explain, and then we'll just learn together. So Hawa, off to you.
All right, thank you so much. So one of the most common ways to interact with, for the user to interact with data in Java are APIs. And for those of you who don't know, APIs are just cool little things you can call to grab data from applications. But, every framework does it a little differently. And since I'm a Java Spring developer, I want to talk about the way that we have APIs in Spring. APIs in Spring. So for all my incoming Java/Spring developers, this is just a high level view of how this works. So of course we have the browser, which accesses the application. So this is where our cool little application with the little home and little guys right here. So we got our browser window. And then we've got our controller layer. And so our controller is where we have all the APIs written. And now APIs can be things like, so there's a couple of different types. There's delete, there's post, there's put, there's get. And all of these have different functionalities, but just know that this is how you can manipulate and deal with the data from outside, not from the back end, essentially.
Okay.
And so this is the view. And the view, like I mentioned, is like the front end. So this is where all the information is visible for said data manipulation, right?
Okay.
And so just so you know, this framework is MVC, or Model View Controller Framework, which is a very popular application, way of building applications. Okay. Then connected to our controller, or what interacts with our controller, is the service layer. Okay. So the service layer, this is where all the juicy code lies. This is where you have the definitions, the methods, and the actual implementation of the methods of the code that you're writing. Okay. And so we have the repo, or the DAO layer. So in Spring, DAOs are data access objects. Now, what are those? So in object-oriented programming languages, there's a concept called abstraction. Okay. Abstraction is when you're separating certain parts of the code so they don't interact too tightly together, and that's what you call like tightly coupled code, which means like if you make a change, tightly coupled code is, for example, if you make a change to one method, it immediately affects maybe a related method, and that can cause some errors, especially if you're trying to make some improvements or updates to the code. That can be quite a headache when you have a really big code base, right? So the DAO, the data access object, are just little, I guess you can call them types of objects that allow you to manipulate the data very easily. So for example, you can have a data access object that is like a car, and then the car will have things like int, like year, string, like name of car. But these are all things, and then like ints like MPG. These are all things. This is like an example DAO or DTO, data type or data access object, where you can access the information of this object without directly manipulating the structure of that object. Okay. And then we have the database layer, which is important because this is where all your lovely data that gets manipulated and stored, preferably MySQL database. This is where all your lovely information gets stored and housed. And so the reason, like I said, why we end up doing these things is, the truth is, in a data, like a enterprise application, there's a lot of moving parts, right? And what you don't want is to accidentally touch something and it breaks everything. This is typically how you would see something like this work in a huge company. So if you're first starting out, or you're a Java developer and you're wanting to come into the professional world, I highly, highly recommend you actually familiarize yourself with this, because this is actually going to make your life a whole lot easier. Because the truth is, when you start becoming, especially a backend developer, it's not anymore just about writing a couple lines of code. You have to understand how each of these layers interact with each other. You need to understand how each of these works, the limitations, the abilities of each thing, etc., etc. That is going to help you wrap your head around this code a lot easier, because trust me, nothing is worse than looking at a huge code base, seeing a bunch of files labeled controller this, service this, and you don't know what any of these words mean.
Yep.
So familiarize yourself with the MVC structure. But yeah, this is just a brief high-level overview.
Hey, what up, fam? This is Saul Levy, host of Africans in Tech, where we're building bridges and shaping futures in tech. Just a quick reminder for those who've not yet subscribed to our YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button. You can catch all of our content, including our whiteboard sessions, where you'll find our full-length videos on our channel. And hit that notification bell, fam.
Okay.
I don't know if that was long enough.
No, that's good.
Okay.
So browser interacts with the controller. Controller gets inputs from the service. And then the service has a bunch of descriptors, which are in the form of DAOs, which house all their values inside of the database.
Right. So the service has code. So like, let's say you have a controller to manipulate, like, get count of cars in the seller lot or whatever.
Okay.
Now, if you want to write code for that, that's where this goes.
Okay.
But if you want to house how to define a car, how to define a used car lot or whatever, or used car lot object,
Yep.
you would define it using a DAO.
Okay.
Or, for example. And then storing all that information would be in the database.
Okay. So let's say like CarMax or Carfax. So on there you have a website that says, hey, you have 10,000 Chevrolet, Traverse in there. So in terms of like that count that gives you that 10,000, would that be coming from the service layer?
Yeah. So if you want any methods or any code to retrieve that information, that's going to be here.
Okay.
So that would be here. But then when it's time for the user or the front end developer to actually retrieve that data, without them having to go all the way in the back end, but having to retrieve that data in a format, in a way where it is visible and applicable and also manipulatable. Then that's when you start using the controller to grab those things.
Okay. So
then makes those calls to get that data. Because a lot of times in the controller, the beautiful thing about Spring is that a lot of times you can get these like default ones. But for the custom controllers you do write, you'll have the methods that are written in the service called in these controllers.
Okay.
So like get card count. And then you have like REST API annotations and all that stuff.
Gotcha.
But yeah, you would have the get car count, which would be defined by like a URL.
Yep.
So like the URLs in the controller is how you reach all this data. So when you call that URL in the browser and like you're asking, like let's say you just have a little box that asks, how many cars do you, or I guess how much MPG does this Toyota Camry 2011 have, right? Then you're gonna call that URL called like get car info, and then that URL and that controller, well, once that is called, you're gonna call that method, get that information, pass it through to the browser/view.
Okay. So I guess in an example of like kitchen, right? So in the kitchen, we talked about it. So this is kind of like having like a, I don't know, maybe like a maid or a cook or whatever it is that says, go grab this thing.
Yes.
And then serve this.
It's almost like a kitchen hand
Yeah.
that like gives you all the information.
Yeah.
Or the butler or somebody, like
Yeah.
you said, like a maid,
Yeah.
gives you all the information about the kitchen.
Yeah.
And so then, like, I guess for the kitchen equivalent, the controller would be the head butler or head server.
Yeah.
You're like, hey guys, get me this, remove this dish, or throw away this dish, whatever. Service is like the actual workers, chefs, dishwashers in the kitchen.
Yep.
Being like, oh, cool, what the head service say?
Yep.
Oh, do this, we got you.
Yep.
And then whatever dish comes out of that is given to the server.
Yep.
That's a little confusing.
To the head.
yeah, the head server,
Yeah.
which is the controller
Yeah.
in this instance, and then
The guy
goes
that takes it out to the people.
yes, to the people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, the main floor, right? And then the fridge is like the database that keeps, well, that's a little complicated. We'll leave that alone because the thing is the database can contain information about the dishes or whatever you need done, right? So, or these objects, which I guess in this case would be the dishes / recipes.
Yeah.
And then all the information about these would be stored in the database actually. So
Gotcha.
maybe like a recipe book.
Yeah. So, and then just to kind of finalize it. So in
Or
spring,
inventory. Yeah.
you were saying that I think in the episode we were talking about how within spring, the sort of servers are already kind of like packaged for you. So you don't have to necessarily train them. They're there to do.
Yeah, so the beautiful thing about Spring is, or the Spring Boot framework is that everything is all packaged up for you and like the appropriate folders and the file structure you need.
Nice.
So you don't have to build that from scratch.
Nice.
You kind of have that there and then you kind of do all the, gnarly work of actually writing the code yourself,
Gnarly, I
So
like
you don't have to, you don't have to worry about the structure and all these things. It kind of
Gotcha.
takes care of the boilerplate stuff for you.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, cool. All right. Well, thank you, Hawa, for another great tutorial. This is in spring.
Thank you.
So if you have any questions, her information is going to be below on how to get in contact with her. And if you have any questions for us, feel free to hit us up at africansintechnology@gmail.com. Again, it's africansintechnology@gmail.com. My name is Saul Levy. It's Africans in Tech.